Ready to make a real impact every day? Join the Active Day Home Care team and help clients maintain their independence in the comfort of their own homes. Make a difference in someone's life as you provide essential daily assistance and protect their health and happiness. Earn up to $20 an hour and enjoy additional perks like optional daily pay, 401k, paid time off, ongoing educational training, and more. Join a team that values care, compassion, and your professional growth. Visit activeday.com to apply.
It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, private investigator Ed Opperman. You can get a hold of me at Opperman Investigations and Digital Forensic Consulting if you reach out to me through my email, oppermaninvestigations@gmail.com. We have a guest today returning, Criminal Justice Chris. The last interview went so fast. You go and look for it up there on Spreaker. Went blew by so fast. We had so many topics we wanted to discuss. All Son of Sam stuff. She's in touch with David Berkowitz. She's got some really, really incredibly detailed research here on the Savino murder, which it's always been speculated. This is one of the Son of Sam victims, and it was always suspected that this was actually an organized crime hit, and that either the process or David Berkowitz had nothing to do with it. Miss Criminal Justice Chris, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Just to correct you really quickly, Wendy Savino was not murdered. She was shot, and she did survive the attack.
Oh, well, great. Okay, good. That's good news. Yeah, you know, that's a silver lining in every cloud. It's like, so, before we get into Savino, tell us about yourself. Who is Criminal Justice Chris?
I have an undergraduate in criminal justice. I have several other undergraduates as well, and I'm currently working on an undergraduate in journalism. And I've been in contact with David Berkowitz since July of 2022. I've been in contact with one of the Son of Sam survivors, Carl De Niro, as well since June of 2022. I had reached out initially to David Berkowitz on behalf of Carl so he could get more information related to the shooting in his case. And I just developed a relationship with David Berkowitz from there.
You know, that's interesting because you mentioned how Wendy Savino survived, and Carl De Niro survived too. When you think of Son of Sam, you think that he was successful or that the cult was successful in every murder attempt that they made. And then also, too, there's all kinds of allegations that this crew of characters were involved in all kind of crazy stuff in New York around that time, like Dart Man. The guy was shooting darts into women's butts as they walked past on the sidewalk and stuff. You just hear, and Eitan Pates, we were talking off the air about, like, Hedda Nussbaum had a connection to this cult, correct?
I believe, I'm not absolutely positive. That's not something that I've looked into too much. There's so much information out there. We're talking thousands of pages of documents that I have in my possession. It's really hard to go through all of it and do any justice. Which, in Maury Terry's defense, I think that was probably part of the problem with him needing to investigate the case. Is he had too much to do, and he seriously needed some help from others.
Yeah, I can sympathize with that. I can hear you with that one. And I wish there was someone out there I could interview about Hedda Nussbaum, because I know a few things behind the scenes, but there's really no one. You know, there's that one book that she wrote. Where the hell is she now? Who knows? And Joel Steinberg, it's very difficult to find contact info for him. The name Steinberg is so common in New York, you could spend all day trying to locate him. So there's some information on Steinberg in files, so I can go through there and see what I can find for you on it and get it over to you. Okay, great. I'd love that. It's such an interesting case, man, and it was so blown up. Mm-hmm. And like so much of this stuff, you know, there's an official story, then there's so much that went on behind the scenes. It seems to be what the real story is. But you wanted to come back and tell us about the Wendy Savino. What's going on with this story here?
Well, primarily it's because of the way the NYPD handled the case, including how they questioned David Berkowitz on May 29th of 2024. There was a Freedom of Information Act release on the Donna Lauria case. There was a sketch in the Donna Lauria file that was not the Son of Sam case. Another podcaster and a detective noticed the sketch in the file and said, hey, this doesn't match up. They started looking into it, and then they found that it was connected to Wendy Savino. They reached out to Wendy Savino. They interviewed her. She alleged that David Berkowitz shot her. And that she told them early on after he was arrested. David Berkowitz is denying shooting her emphatically. And the NYPD, I would argue, didn't particularly do their jobs looking into the case over almost the past 50 years, for one, and as well as his interrogation. They didn't handle his interrogation very well, and they also didn't handle her interaction with the newspaper as well. To go into his interrogation in more detail, they tried to tell the media that they tripped him up on the .32 caliber weapon that he used in the bullets, which is not true. He had information before. Because it was already out, and it had been out for a month and a half, and one of his friends had relayed some of the information to them, and he had said, whenever he was being interrogated, but I always used a .44, and they interpreted that as, okay, or I'm trying to think of the exact wording, that he used a .44, but there was like some implication that the way that they took his wording, that they thought that he could have used something before, and that they tripped him up, and they reported to the media that they tripped him up on the caliber of the weapon, and that's not what happened.
Do we have any
had problems?
When you talk to David, does he? What does he say about owning different weapons besides the .44 Bulldog?
Oh, as far as I know, he never owned a .32 caliber. I know that he owned several other weapons whenever he was arrested. And of course, prior to the .44 caliber shootings, he also had stabbed a woman in the Bronx, and that was Michelle Foreman. So if they're trying to spin it to the point where they're saying that they tripped him up and he used other type of weapons before, they need to reflect back on the Michelle Foreman case and realize that he used a knife before. I'm not, I'll be honest, I questioned him immediately once I found out, and I said, did you do it? I understand also if you can't discuss it based on some of the indicators I was already seeing with the case that it didn't look quite right. And her husband was in politics and was a fairly large businessman in the area. But he insists that he didn't do it. So and I don't think the sketch looks like him. At this point, I have an undergraduate in criminal justice. If he says he didn't do it, I'm just going to take him at his word. And I don't find the Savino story based on the husband's and the family's background and her statements to the police, as well as her statements on podcasts, to be particularly reliable.
Right, and as we discussed last time, Berkowitz doesn't want the reputation of being a snitch under his current housing situation.
That is correct. He was approached after he was interrogated because they sent in multiple detectives, and some men came up to him after the interrogation and wanted to know why were they here and what did you tell them. And he told them why they were there, and he said, I didn't tell them anything. And they just nodded their heads, and they moved forward from there. So, arguably, could he have done it? you can't completely rule that out based on being in maximum security and who he's been involved with over the years. All the same, based on what's mounting and what I see, as well as inconsistencies in her statements, and my belief that I don't think she was able to positively identify him based on the lighting conditions, I find the case puzzling.
Right, and for people who say, well, if Berkowitz is afraid of repercussions for speaking out, well, all these process folks are scattered to the wind. They're all old, they're dead, they're retired, they're ineffective. But it's not just them, and the organized crime goes on forever. The New York City organized crime people are still, still there, and even, I worked a lot of organized crime defense cases back in the 80s, and you still got to watch your step around these people. They're coming out of prison, and then if they think you're not doing the right thing, you're going to have a problem. So everyone has to watch your step, and if he's inside, you really got to double watch your step. You mentioned the husband. What was the deal with her husband?
Okay, the husband was Joseph Acevino Jr. He was a prior NYPD officer. He left the NYPD, I believe, because he committed first-degree perjury over stolen property. I found this in an older book. It's a book that Judge Fino wrote, My Life in Politics. Took me a little bit to track it down. I got it through an interlibrary loan. But he had an electronic calculator. It was they were prototypes at the time. So, the audience is going to think, well, electronic calculators are not a big deal.
Right.
But by 60 standards, they were about $2,500. So you adjust for inflation, that's about a $45,000 steal. That's a big deal. And law enforcement isn't particularly forgiving whenever an officer perjures himself. And he left around the same time. He was represented by one of his constituents that he also rented commercial property to. I believe the man's name was Calandra, and Calandra was able to effectively negotiate a $500 fine for him. He didn't go to prison over it. And then from there, he has all sorts of other legal problems.
It's funny.
Over the years.
You mentioned a calculator back in those days. My dad was an accountant, and he had this thing called an adding machine. Okay, right around that time, yeah, an adding machine. It was the size of a modern-day printer, and it had a paper tape in there, and like little keys, like an old typewriter, and it had a handle, and you pulled it down, and that's how you operate it. Although it was plugged in, but you had this handle you had to pull back and forth, and that thing was worth a fortune. That thing was expensive, yeah. So for having a calculator back in 1977, it was like having a NASA computer system,
Yeah, I agree, and he wasn't short of his scandals. Yeah. That's all I'm going to say about Savino. His dad, I found through an older New York Times article that his dad was involved in bribery of plastering contracts with the city. Wendy Savino and Joseph Savino's son was investigated and disbarred for being involved in bribery of a mayoral election in New York City.
Which mayor?
Off the top of my head, I don't remember which mayor, but I believe it was in the 2000s.
Oh, okay.
I'll have to look more into that, but the FBI was involved. I can tell you that much. Joseph Savino Jr. also was having financial problems the year that Wendy Savino was shot. And it was related to his insurance brokerage. The insurance department with the state started investigating him. Late 76, we believe she was issued a subpoena whenever she was in the United Kingdom to come back and talk. And we think she has stated that it had nothing to do with the shooting, but law enforcement had said that they could protect her. She refused to come back. And it just went from there. We suspect that it was probably related to the insurance investigation with the state, based on how he was handling his financial affairs. He had accounts like in California and Bahamas. His attorney tried to play it off like he was just a poor businessman. He couldn't remember numbers related to paying back an insurance company for money that it appears that he could have been skimming.
Well, what about these stories about...
The case is just a hot mess.
Yeah,
I don't know what else to say.
Well, what about... I'm reading here in these notes you sent me over. It says that before the shooting, there was an arson and there was a vandalism.
Yes.
That wasn't Berkowitz, right? The Berkowitz didn't do that.
No. I mean, 2 years before, I mean, that's something that I've kind of questioned. I was like, oh no, because like 2 years before Wendy Savino was shot, Joe Savino's office had been lit on fire, and they believed it was an arson. About five or 6 weeks before she was shot, his office was vandalized. I don't know the reasons behind that. I can't really find any information. I tried to order Freedom of Information Acts related to the incidents. I haven't been successful in obtaining them so far. But arguably, he was quite a fire buff, and he was logging fires all the time. But, they also found years ago that he wasn't able to get to certain crime scenes fast enough through the logging of his journals. So they think that he was using information from a scanner and then just logging them. I've had conversations with David as well, and he told me that his fire journals, a lot of them, that he was just a fire buff and he was keeping track of fires. That's not to say he wasn't lighting any, obviously, but all the fires in his fire journals were not actually lit by him. But
let's explore that for a second, because that's very little known. My understanding was that David did light a lot of fires. He was an arsonist, dumpster fires, that kind of thing. So now, but I didn't know about this journal. Now you're saying, what did he say when you asked him about his arson activity, fireboat?
He said that he was a huge fire buff. So were his friends. They had been keeping track of fires and fireboxes since high school. Whenever he got out of the military, he was hoping that they would all be able to reconnect and continue to be fire buffs, but that didn't work out, obviously, because a lot of them had moved on. They had girlfriends or wives or other things going on in their lives. But his fire, I don't have his fire journals. I would personally like to get them. He has something like close to 2,000 fires logged.
Really? And so does he admit, though, to setting some fires?
He admits to setting some fires. But, like, okay, for instance, there'll be, from some examples that I've seen, because there's an example of the fire journal in Lawrence Klausner's book, you'll see a pattern where you'll see one is logged, and then you have another one logged, and it's like it could be across the city, and then he has them timed out. But there's no way that he could have gotten there that fast to light a fire, if that makes sense.
It does make sense, but is it possible he had help, though? Others were helping him?
I mean, it's possible, or maybe he was logging and looking for patterns. I really don't know.
Yeah.
I would like to get a hold of his fire journals. I'll be honest.
But what does he say, though? Does he have a motive for why he would be lighting fires?
He has not given a motive about lighting fires other than being a bit of a firebug.
What about animal? What does he admit to animal abuse?
I haven't really talked to him about animal abuse. I'll be honest.
Not even the.
I will.
Not even the German Shepherds at Untermeyer Park?
I do not believe he was responsible for the German Shepherds at Untermeyer Park.
Okay.
I know whenever the Netto house was attacked, he wasn't the only person seen. There was a witness that stated that they saw somebody else driving a getaway car, and they identified the person as Richard Sperazza, which is a man who was supposedly involved and was a prior coworker of David Berkowitz's. Richard Sperazza was also found. Weirdly enough, whenever I started investigating Savino, because Savino also was a partner in the Wakefield Detective Agency, or Detective Bureau, which was involved in the Donnie Brasco scandals.
Right.
So I started to try to find out who owned the Wakefield Agency, and I found an old appellate document, and there was a partner that appears to have been involved in human trafficking. There were a couple girls that were picked up in Florida and brought back to New York. They were being housed in an apartment. This partner was having sex with them. He got busted out. I think they were about 15 years old at the time. The person that busted them out that's listed in the document was Patrick J. Twomey. And it just came to me to start looking into Patrick J. Twomey. And whenever I found information on him, I found that he was the father-in-law of Richard Sperazza. Now, he wasn't the father-in-law of Sperazza until the 90s, but according to the obituary, they went to the same church. So you don't know how long they knew one another. That's part of the problem. And Twomey, weirdly enough, his name ends up in a legal document related to a lawsuit on Malcolm X related to Aziz and Islam. Are you familiar with those cases where they were accused of shooting Malcolm X, and they had to go through the Innocence Project, and they did not do it, and they ended up winning a lawsuit recently? And I know that Malcolm X's family is also suing the federal government right now. Yeah,
I actually had Malcolm X's daughter on the show, Ilyasa, on the show years ago. Oh yeah, sure. What do you call it? But now, Twomey is such a familiar name. And am I thinking of something else, or what else could this Twomey character be involved with, or that name? Is there another case with the name Twomey?
I don't know. All I've been able to find on him is Malcolm X. Right. He was a homicide detective later on with the NYPD. But just like my intuition told me to look it up, and that I'd heard the name before. But that Twomey name is nowhere in documents. So I've heard the name somewhere before. I just don't know where, and it's kind of driving me crazy.
It's starting to drive me crazy at this moment.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. And what was the connection? You mentioned something too with Donnie Brasco, this private investigation company. This is something that Brasco wasn't working for or against?
Okay, it was the Wakefield Detective Bureau. They were involved with protection for the Shah of Iran's son, Reza Pahlavi.
Okay.
But the Wakefield was somehow involved in the Donnie Brasco jewelry heist scandal. There's very little information published on it through the media, but they ended up losing their contract with the Pahlavi family over it. And when they were being investigated, they found that one of the employees with the Wakefield Detective Bureau was a prior police officer who was also working for the Bonanno crime family. I believe the person's last name was Mulligan.
Okay. You mentioned earlier some human trafficking. What is, and you hear these stories about drug dealing and sexual trafficking. What does Berkowitz have to say about those allegations?
I haven't talked to him about that really, because I don't find the conversations to be particularly conducive through Securus or through the U.S. mail. Mm-hmm. He has a hard time answering anything because of being in maximum security. And frankly, like I've said before in the previous podcast with you, I have agreed not to share or publish or distribute or sell his correspondence without his direct permission. So some of what we discuss, I'm not able to say, but other things that I've told you so far, he's okay with it.
And you said that recently Wendy Savino was interviewed. So is she still sticking to this story that it was Berkowitz?
He is still sticking to the story that it was Berkowitz and that nobody took her seriously. But the problem is she was in the back of the parking lot. The lighting conditions, she has admitted on a podcast that there was no light in the back of the parking lot. But yet she described him as having a tan and having blue eyes. Now, if a person is shooting at you and it's dark, how do you make out a person's eye color, let alone determine that the person is tan? Even if the light briefly comes on in your car, I know that whenever she got into the car, she shut the door. So I'm going to assume that the light went off fairly rapidly. But even having a light on the car, the car with as dark as it was at the back of the parking lot, I don't see how she possibly could have seen him, let alone make out a tan. I mean, when David Berkowitz was arrested, he didn't even have a tan, and that was in August. April 9th, I mean, you've lived in New York, Ed.
Yeah.
That's not conducive to tanning weather. And the weather had been, I would say, under 60 degrees for months.
Well, not only that, but
he wouldn't have had a tan.
Yeah, he has that pasty skin. If anything, he would have a sunburn. I don't think he's the kind of guy that tans, you know?
No, and I mean, I've looked at the weather, and on the 15th of April, sure, he could have gotten a tan. He would have gotten a sunburn because the weather was unseasonably hot, and it went up to as high as 90 degrees. But arguably, you know what? She had a traumatic head injury. Yeah. They didn't get the sketch from her until almost 30 days following the shooting. I believe the sketch was done on May the 5th of 1976. So you're going to have all sorts of cognitive distortions between then. And then you have a year later, about a year and a half later, he gets arrested. And, you know, she points the finger to him and says that she believes he did it, but the NYPD didn't take her seriously, and neither did the district attorney's offices.
Oh, so originally when she said it was Berkowitz, no one connected it to Berkowitz.
No, nobody took her seriously, and you would think based on her husband's political stature and business stature in the community that they would have put their foot down and they would have gone to the media and they would have said, this person shot me, or this person shot my wife. Right. It was a high publicity. The case was being covered for a good year, but neither one of them went to the media. Why? It doesn't add up. It doesn't make any sense.
Right. And what people need to understand, in New York City at that time in the 70s, the organized crime was so powerful that even if you knew the guy that shot you, if you were told not to say it was that guy, you would just have to go along. You'd have to play along. And this went all the way up to the top. You know, even all the cops would have to cooperate, too, because everyone had their hands out. In your notes you sent me here, you mentioned something, too, that she was issued a subpoena to testify in front of a grand jury after she was shot on a different case. Had nothing to do with this.
Well, we don't know if it was a different case at this point. I think it was a different case. We initially suspected that she could have been subpoenaed because they had a potential person who attacked her. But she has publicly said that it wasn't related to her shooting. So I'm coming to the conclusion that it was likely related to the insurance investigation because she was subpoenaed within a very short window. And possibly they might have suspected that his business dealings had something to do with her shooting. In the police reports, though, that were released, that another podcaster obtained access to, is clearly stated in the police report that they suspected that he was involved in narcotics trafficking.
Who was?
And
The husband?
Joseph Savino. Yes,
Really?
He was suspected of narcotics trafficking. Yes, and it's in the report that he called his paramour at the bar prior to leaving, which it was his mistress.
Hmm.
It's also stated in the report that they interviewed one person, Chris Hagedorn. He was with the Bronx News. He owned the paper. Hagedorn knew Savino, and Hagedorn had told the police that he had talked to a couple mob guys, and they said that she was fooling around and she got what she deserved.
Ooh.
Whatever that means, if she was cheating on him as well, or, I mean, was she fooling around with the book? I mean, that's a very, I'm not making an allegation toward her, don't get me wrong, or accusing her of anything, but it's so open to interpretation, you don't really know what to do with that statement.
Well, the night she was shot, was she alone?
She was with her husband.
Okay.
She was with Joseph Savino. They took two different cars. He left earlier, and then she was going to leave the parking lot, and then she was approached and she was shot. There was an initial suspect, Joseph Messina. He was a Purple Gang member. He was found dead about 4 o'clock in the morning, I believe on April 10th. And he was wearing a leather jacket, which the suspect was described as wearing, I believe, a 3/4 leather jacket. But Messina was quickly ruled out because of his stature. He was about 5'6", and he was very thin, maybe 140 pounds or so. Don't quote me on that. And he also had a handlebar mustache. So they just went ahead and ruled him out and said, okay, well, it's not him. But the Purple Gang was also subcontracting for organized crime at the time. You know, they were involved in kidnapping, extortion, homicide, narcotics trafficking. So you have to wonder why they would have suspected a Purple Gang member for her shooting right away. You know?
Yeah. Clearly, they were looking in those areas. Yeah.
Yes, and really, I mean, my opinion, the most alarming thing in the police report is the name Richard Niclario. He had called him from the bar prior to her getting shot. He also called her from home. When the NYPD interviewed him, they and this is Savino, he said he couldn't remember the conversation with Niclario. And then whenever he referred to his conversation from home, he said it was related to a golf outing that was supposed to be going on with one of his partners at the Wakefield the following day. There is no evidence in the file that the NYPD followed up with Niclario and interviewed him. I don't know if they're just holding that part back or if they just never contacted him. But another researcher, and I would have never found this if it wasn't for him, so I have to give him kudos. His name is Paul Hart, and he actually used to work with this other podcast on research. He got a little disillusioned by them based on their allegations and the direction that they were going with the Savino case, and he questioned the narrative, started doing his own research. He contacted me. He gave me the information on Niclario. The researcher's name is Paul Hart. And he found Niclario's name in a book by O'Brien named Boss of Bosses. And there's a Richard J. Niclario in the book that was involved in or was an associate with the mob related to Paul Castellano. I also found another Niclario that was involved with a taxi cab business. I believe it was, I don't remember it off the top of my head. So you can't really rule that Niclario. It isn't that Niclario too, because American Transit Insurance also insured taxi cab companies. But the Richard J. Niclario actually lived in the general vicinity of Joseph A. Savino. And Savino, based on saying he couldn't remember the conversation, to me it raises red flags. I would say it's more likely the Richard J. Niclario based on other information that's in the reports.
And you mentioned these phone records. What kind of phone records were these? Back in those days, there was you could get local usage. How would they obtain those phone records?
I don't believe that they actually obtained phone records. I think it was just an interview where he said, okay. I called this person, probably somebody reported that he called a couple people from the bar, and then they questioned him from there. And I don't know, maybe they requested that he turn over his phone records, and he did it. But it's not in the police file.
Okay, now what's this business here about Berkowitz living out of his car?
Yeah, that's what was presented to the NYPD whenever this podcast and retired detective Mike Lorenzo they had obtained this. They were trying to frame it in a specific way, saying that David Berkowitz did it. First of all, they tried to say that he was driving a cab at the time. He was not driving a cab. He worked for IBI, and he was working the night shift typically. Sometimes he would work second shift. He worked on Fridays, so that it doesn't really match up with the time frame. The other thing is they tried to say that they believed, because he moved out of the Casares on the 8th, and he had the confrontation about the dog. I don't know how familiar you are with that, but
sure.
They said that they tried to say that triggered him, and that he went out and shot Wendy Savino the next day. Mm. Well, the move wasn't that simple. He didn't just up and move. And they tried to say that he was likely living out of his car for 2 weeks. I found, and I have this on my computer because I had ordered an FOIA on David Berkowitz through the FBI about 1.5, 2 years ago, because I wanted to look into handwriting analysis related to the letters. And they released some new information and included his lease application. And it shows that he applied. He applied for the Pine Street apartment on March 27th. So it wasn't just an abrupt move. He was approved on the 30th of March. And then according to his payment, the payment for, I'm trying to think of the correct wording. Whenever he was arrested and he stopped paying rent, there was a warrant issued for non-payment on his apartment. According to this paperwork, it said that he moved in on or around April 1st. David told me that he was trickling property over from the Casara residence to his Pine Street address for probably about 1.5 weeks. So he was never without residence. What the NYPD did is they just took the word of an amateur true crime sleuth podcaster who could have easily looked into this better if his research skills were a little bit better.
Well, and I got to tell you something else. I don't know how old you are, but I was around in '77, and there was all kind. There was squats you could live in. No one was living in their car back in those days. That's just ridiculous. There was all kind of flop house motels everywhere, man, and you could get a cheap room, man. There's no reason to live in your car in 1977. That's a waste of time. And you know what? I mean, for 2 weeks not having access to a shower or a bathroom, I mean, by all accounts, David Berkowitz is documented as being a very clean person. Well, they had bathhouses, they had YMCAs back in those days. Yeah. The shower wasn't a big deal either. Yeah. I don't want to ask how old you are, but come on, I was out there in the 70s. Okay. We're moving on. What's this business about the leather jacket? What's going on with that?
The leather jacket, he was shown a couple different sketches during the interrogation. He was shown the sketch that's been made to the media, And he was shown a second sketch that was made later on of the suspect in a 3/4 leather jacket. The NYPD has tried denying that he was shown a second sketch of a person in a 3/4 leather jacket. He is adamant about it. He ordered his interrogation tape. Remarkably, I know this is going to shock you. The interrogation tape is distorted. The sound isn't great. He tried to send it to a production company, I believe it was in Atlanta, to clear up the sound. Wasn't able to clear up the sound quality. They did have a tape tape recorder that apparently was placed on the table that has the recorded interrogation, but he hasn't gotten that yet, and it's been a year. Even the other interrogation, it took him, I think, something like 3 or 4 months before they finally provided that to him. And frankly, he's entitled to that. I don't know why they're giving him the runaround. And they've denied showing him that other sketch. And then the podcast, when they were pushed further, then they tried to say, well, we showed him another sketch, but it was the Virginia Voskerichian sketch. No, that's not the sketch. And I mean, I have been writing from David Berkowitz, and he told me I could share it publicly, that yes, whenever they interrogated him, they showed him a sketch of a person in a 3/4 leather jacket. John Comparetto, one of his prior friends in high school that he served with in the auxiliary police, he is on record on a DA tape stating that and I think it was when they were reinvestigating the case, it might have been like in 79 or 80, he stated that he loaned David Berkowitz a black leather jacket and never got it back. David is saying he's confused him for somebody else that they were friends with, possibly maybe lending it to his friend Jeff Hartenberg. He said the timing of the leather jacket didn't make sense. First of all, he said that he loaned it to him right before he went to the military. David enlisted in the military in June of 1971. And why lend a coat late spring, early summer, especially when a person's getting ready to go into the military? John Comparetto lived about 5 minutes from his dad, so he could have easily retrieved the leather jacket from Berkowitz's dad. He didn't do it. In another podcast before the DA tapes came out, he never mentioned lending David Berkowitz a leather jacket. Now, could it just not have come up? I guess that's possible. But Comparetto eventually said that whenever he would talk to David Berkowitz about the leather jacket, that he said that Nate Berkowitz had donated it. But David is saying that no, the leather jacket story isn't accurate. I don't know what else to say. John Comparetto also signed off as a character witness or character reference for David Berkowitz's gun permit. I believe this was in 75 or 76.
You know, I never considered that. Berkowitz had a permit for that 44?
He got the permit from another state.
Okay.
He got the gun from another state, but he did have a gun permit.
I never even thought of that. I never even considered what was going on with that. I would just assume these were illegal guns.
Yeah, they weren't. Everything that he owned, I do not believe, were illegal guns. There was one gun that was purchased in Texas, and then he had several other guns at his residence. I believe he had a .45. I would have to go back through my notes and find all the different weapons that he had. I've written so many blogs that frankly, I don't remember small details like that occasionally.
Yeah, you actually have a list of you know what? I'll put these notes you sent me over. I'll put them in the description of the show here. You have a list of weapons and stuff in here too as well. What else you want to tell us about the Savino case? Let's see how we're doing on time, because I did want to get into It's on Pates a bit, but that's okay. We can always come back. What else can you tell us about the Savino case?
I don't know if there's really anything else that I want to talk about the Savino case. Let me just look through my notes. So let's see.
Quite a bit of notes you sent here. It's like a whole Encyclopedia Britannica.
Yeah,
I've been extremely thorough
in this for months.
Yeah.
I mean, one thing that alarmed me is following the shooting. It was reported by multiple media sources that witnesses saw the shooter flee with other men. It wasn't just reported in the Daily News, which is obviously sensational. It looks like it started with the AP and was reported elsewhere, like the Olympian, the Kansas City Star, Lubbock Avalanche Journal. At no time did the media reach out to these media sources to ask for retractions or corrections. Nina's was on a highly trafficked road. Now they're trying to say there were no witnesses, and they canvassed the area. And Woody Savino is also backing them up and saying that it's incorrect and it didn't happen. And in my opinion, I think that's problematic. This other podcast in the NYPD has also tried to downplay that people can be shot as warnings. I know that's not true because I have a police report on Dominic Sisconi, who was shot on July 13th, 1977. And it's clearly documented in that report that they believed he was an organized crime hit and that he was shot as a warning. They've tried to play down that 32 caliber weapons are routinely used in organized crime hits. Whenever that's not accurate, they're easy to conceal. They allow for rapid shots. They're less expensive than larger models. They're a good choice for quick organized crime hits. And frankly, although Hollywood shows other guns being used in movies, a lot of what's out there, it's holiday myth. And they've tried to say that organized crime, that they don't go after family members, wives, girlfriends, any of that. That's categorically not true. Even Henry Hill is on the book saying that they put out a contract on his wife and children. And I have a ton of examples of women and family members who have been targets.
Oh yeah, that's totally a myth that they don't go with the family members. That's ridiculous.
Well, yeah, I mean, Henry Hill said, and I know no profanity is used on your show, so I'll edit it out, but he basically said if you buy into that kind of myth, you get caught with your pants down. And to try to sell that based on all the red flags that this was an organized crime is not responsible. And frankly, Joe Coffey who was on an organized crime task force with the NYPD. You would say he was all over David Berkowitz. He didn't like him. I think he probably would have nailed him with anything possible. But even Coffey, you have to question why Coffey wouldn't have taken this case seriously if he knew about it.
I've done a couple of shows about Tommy Uvo. Tommy Uva in Brooklyn, who was robbing in the 90s, was robbing all those social clubs, the Mafia social clubs. And they killed his wife along with him, okay? And then they went and made all these movies, tried to rewrite the whole story, claiming that she was a part of the robberies too, and everyone knows. And by the way, the guy that killed them was their neighbor, a couple of houses down from them. Like all these people know. Yeah, oh yeah, the story is so... And Curtis Lee was all mixed up in this story. It's just a crazy thing. Typical New York crazy story. When then they put up these cover-up movies and stuff like that, where all the actors from The Sopranos are in them and stuff. It's just a real... And people should go back and find the shows they did about the Tommy Uva and find those.
Another interesting thing to note on Joseph Savino, and I want to not forget to add this. In '85, he was convicted for illegal gun running. He purchased 3 pistols with silencers and a machine gun from a federal informant. At the time, the only people using silencers were hitmen. They weren't used for home defense, target shooting, or sport shooting. He had publicly said, and it was in the papers, he was upset about being investigated on American Transit Insurance. The IRS also started investigating him. He threatened to go to war with the IRS, and that's when the guns became involved, and he ended up going to jail and spending time for tax evasion and illegal guns. So he wasn't void of having a temper, and you have to wonder. I'm not saying that he did it. I'm not saying that he put a contract out on his wife because she knew something. I'm just saying he had too many things going on, and there were too many things pointing back to organized crime. And I find that worrisome. And just on one last note, there's another organized crime tie. His name was run through Been Verified. There was an alias found, Anthony Bruscia. We found a couple brushes associated with narcotics trafficking. One was with the Lucchese crime family. And
is that spelled like Bruscia? Bruscia, B-R-A-C-I-A?
Yes, Bruscia. Yeah, Bruscia.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. And then the other one, I believe, was associated with the Gambino crime family. We're not exactly sure which Bruscia it is. I mean, arguably it could be neither one of them, and it could be just a coincidence, and that somebody's name is pulling from a previous address that's associated with it. I mean, some more investigation would need to be made to determine if Joseph Savino knew a Bruscia or if the Bruscia is friends with the family. I tried to find additional information. I used ChatGPT just to see if it would pull additional information on Bruscia, because there is a name in a Senate document that associates him with different crime families. They aren't necessarily the same person. But when I ran it through ChatGPT, a name came back, and it said this person was involved with the Colombo crime family, and it connected the Bruscia with the Son of Sam case. And I'm wondering if ChatGPT is somehow cross-referencing with Been Verified and these other sources, and then it just took everything from the media online and pulled it together. But it also flashed a picture of somebody through LinkedIn that it's suspected could be the same Anthony Bruscia. I do not think it's the same one. I did a blog on it, showed the ChatGPT image, and then I erased the person's photo out because I don't want to get accused of pointing the finger at this person.
Has anybody ever gone to those?
I don't think it's involved.
Yeah, has anybody ever gone to those organized crime bloggers like Jerry Capecci and asked them? Because it's a common rumor, that one of those Son of Sam cases was an organized crime attempt. Has anybody ever run it by them?
Well, it's probably why the sketch ended up in the Donna Loria file. Because Donna Loria was originally suspected as being an organized crime hit. Her ex-boyfriend had made documented threats against her. She was fearful of her life, and it's documented he was involved with organized crime. Yeah, you have to question why that sketch ended up in the Donna Loria file.
Which sketch?
The Wendy Savino sketch.
Oh, really?
It's
okay, that's interesting.
I would say it's, there could have been similarities with the description, sure, but if they suspected both were organized crime related, it could have ended up in a file for that reason. And you don't know how many other files that sketches ended up in with the NYPD, to be truthful.
Yeah, and even
it
Carl,
might not just be the Lauria.
Yeah, Carl, they tried to claim it was a drug hit because he had long hair. So even with him, So
well, I mean, arguably, Carl has flat out said, yeah, I was smoking pot that I was shot, and his first reaction was to take the bag and toss it out the window. And I've joked with him. I was like, could you please? This case is stressing me out. Can you please go back to that crime scene and find the bag and just forward it to me, please?
Yeah, but no one would want that Colombian dirt weed. That was in New York City in the 70s. Trust me.
Yeah.
You get more high of it if a bale hits you on the head than smoking it. Okay, we're out of time. We've been talking to Criminal Justice Chris. Check out her Medium. I forgot to mention her Medium blog, I guess you call it. Under Criminal Justice Chris, and she's on Twitter too as well. And all these different articles, we have to have you come back and talk about Eitan Pace and all these other related huge stories that are all mixed up with this kind of stuff. Maybe even Andre Rand from Staten Island too, and all these different cases. Criminal Justice. Yeah, go ahead.
Eitan Pace is an important one to talk about. I have a couple different people that I'm researching with that are very into researching Eitan Pace and have quite a bit of documentation on him. So, yeah, I'd love to come back on and get you what I have on it.
Well, the one little thing that I always try to talk about when Eitan Pace comes up is Mickey Cesar from Dial Joint, the Pope of Pot. His group was called the Church of the Realized Fantasy, where that guy Ratzinger was a member, and he kidnapped that ballerina and killed her and fed her, made stew and fed her to the homeless there in I think it was Bryant Park in New York. He had a picture of Eitan Pace on his wall. I think it was framed. Maybe my mind is playing tricks with me, but I remember that missing persons poster of Eitan Pace, and I believe it was in a frame. But it definitely was 100% on his wall. He was a NAMBLA member too as well. He just came up in two entities recently, and that connection always spooked me. And I had a friend who and it's, what the hell is going on here?
My opinion, based on what I have on Pace, is he looks like he was trafficked from a pedophile standpoint and then murdered. There are documented witnesses that saw Eitan Pace with a person described to look similar to Ben Rose. His dad owned the Edgeless Pharmacy in the state of New York. Ben Rose was also a confidential informant for the NYPD and was associated with Roy Cohen.
Oh, really? I was not aware of that, but we'll have to get to that next time because we are out of time. Criminal Justice Chris, man. Always good stuff. Very well researched, man. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Good night.